Most people believe failure begins the moment they quit. But what if it starts much earlier? Long before the first obstacle. Long before the first mistake. Sometimes failure quietly begins the moment we ask the world to witness a future that doesn't exist yet. It's a strange habit. Someone decides they'll get fit. Within an hour, they've posted about it. Another person plans to write a book. Before a single chapter exists, they're already describing it to friends. Someone dreams of launching a business. Instead of building it, they spend evenings talking about what it will become. At first, none of this seems dangerous. Sharing dreams feels exciting. Encouraging, even. People smile. They congratulate us. They tell us we'll do great things. For a brief moment, it feels as though life has already changed. Yet weeks later, nothing looks different. The notebook remains empty. The gym membership collects dust. The business idea stays trapped inside conversations. Eventually, people blame distractions. Bad luck. Lack of discipline. But hidden beneath those explanations is something few ever notice. Our minds have a remarkable ability to confuse recognition with accomplishment. And once that confusion takes hold, motivation quietly begins to disappear. This isn't really a story about ambition. It's a story about protecting it. Years ago, beyond the crowded roads that connected the trading towns, there stood a quiet riverside community where nearly everyone knew one another. It wasn't famous. No travelers came searching for it. Life moved slowly. Fishermen greeted the sunrise. Children chased dragonflies through the fields. Craftsmen opened their workshops before the village bell echoed across the valley. Among them lived a young man named Adrian. If someone asked what he wanted from life, he never lacked an answer. Some mornings he dreamed of becoming the finest bridge builder in the region. A month later he wanted to create beautiful musical instruments. By winter he was convinced he would become the greatest mapmaker anyone had ever known. His imagination never rested. Neither did his excitement. Every new idea felt like discovering treasure. Whenever inspiration struck, Adrian couldn't keep it inside. Before taking even a single step, he went searching for an audience. He'd visit the riverside cafe where merchants gathered after work. "I've figured it out," he'd announce with shining eyes. "This time everything will be different." People enjoyed listening to him. Some admired his confidence. Others admired his passion. Even those who doubted him couldn't help smiling at the excitement in his voice. Soon the room would fill with encouragement. "You're going to do amazing things. We always knew you had talent. You'll make us proud." Adrian would walk home feeling lighter than air. His heart raced with possibility. His mind filled with vivid pictures of the future. That night he barely slept. Not because he was working, but because success already felt real. Morning arrived. The plans remained neatly folded on his desk. He told himself he'd begin after breakfast. Breakfast turned into afternoon. Afternoon became tomorrow. Tomorrow quietly became next week. Eventually another idea appeared. And just like before, the cycle started over. Each new dream brought another audience. Another wave of applause. Another burst of confidence. Another beginning. Without an ending. At first nobody seemed to notice. The village simply thought Adrian was exploring different interests. But seasons passed. The carpenter who had started as an apprentice now owned his own workshop. The young fisherman who once struggled to repair his nets now captained the largest boat on the river. Even children Adrian had once taught to skip stones were beginning their own trades. Life around him kept moving. Only Adrian seemed to remain standing in the same place. The hardest part wasn't watching others succeed. It was remembering how many versions of himself had never come to life. Every unfinished project became a quiet reminder. Not of what he lacked, but of what he abandoned. One autumn evening, heavy clouds gathered over the valley. Most villagers hurried indoors before the rain arrived. Adrian wandered alone along the riverbank. The water reflected the darkening sky. Leaves drifted silently across the current before disappearing around the bend. He found himself wondering if dreams vanished the same way. Not with a loud collapse, but slowly. So quietly that no one noticed until they were already gone. As the first drops of rain began to fall, he spotted an old woman sitting beneath the shelter of a weathered stone pavilion overlooking the river. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She simply watched the flowing water as though it were telling a story only she could hear. People in the village knew her as Elara. She had once designed water wheels, irrigation channels, and mills that kept nearby farms alive through difficult seasons. Although she rarely sought attention, nearly every family had benefited from something she had quietly built. Children greeted her with respect. Farmers often asked for her advice. Yet she almost never spoke unless someone truly wanted to listen. Adrian hesitated before approaching. Something about her calmness made his own restless thoughts impossible to ignore. Without looking away from the river, Elara asked softly, "Have you come here to escape the rain? Or to escape yourself?" The question caught him off guard. He laughed awkwardly. "I don't even know anymore." For the first time in years, he admitted something he had never said aloud. "I always begin with certainty." His voice grew quieter. "And somehow, I always end with nothing." The old woman remained silent for several seconds. Not because she didn't have an answer. Because she knew that some questions become clearer after silence than after advice. The river continued flowing between them. Steady. Patient. Unconcerned with anyone watching. Finally, Elara turned toward Adrian. "Tell me something. When an idea first enters your mind, what is the very first thing you do?" Adrian answered almost immediately. "I tell people." A small smile crossed his face. "I suppose I've always been excited. I like seeing their reactions. I like hearing that they believe in me." He paused before adding quietly, "It makes everything feel possible." Elara nodded. "I believe you." Then she asked another question. "And after everyone has admired your future, what usually happens the next morning?" Adrian looked down at the wet stones beneath his feet. His answer came much slower this time. "I lose something. I still want the dream. But it doesn't pull me the way it did before. The excitement fades. I tell myself I'll start tomorrow. And somehow tomorrow never arrives." The rain had almost stopped. Clouds drifted apart, allowing a thin beam of evening light to stretch across the river. Elara stood. "Come meet me at sunrise. I won't explain anything tonight. I'd rather show you." Adrian barely slept. Not because he expected a miracle. Because he couldn't stop thinking about her questions. They had exposed something uncomfortable. For years he had blamed timing, money, bad luck, even his own personality. Yet he had never questioned the habit that came before every failure. Morning arrived wrapped in pale golden light. Mist floated gently above the river as Adrian walked toward an abandoned watermill where Elara often worked. She was already there. Beside her rested two empty clay jars. They looked identical. Same shape. Same size. Same color. Without saying a word, she handed Adrian a wooden bucket. "Fill both." He lowered the bucket into the river and carefully poured water until both jars were full. When he finished, Elara placed one jar inside the cool stone mill where sunlight barely reached. The second jar she carried outside into the village square. Within minutes curious villagers gathered around. Children pointed. Merchants slowed their carts. Neighbors smiled. Elara lifted the jar high enough for everyone to see. "This vessel," she announced warmly, "holds enough water to nourish the garden I'll build." People applauded. Some complimented her vision. Others began suggesting where the flowers should grow. One farmer even offered seeds. Everyone loved the idea. For nearly an hour people admired a garden that didn't yet exist. Eventually the crowd dispersed. Elara quietly returned the jar to the square. She didn't cover it. She didn't move it. She simply walked away. Adrian looked confused. "Aren't we going to use it?" She smiled. "Not yet." Over the following days, Elara said very little. Each morning she visited the hidden jar inside the mill. She used small amounts of its water to nourish several young saplings growing behind the old building. She worked quietly. No audience. No announcements. No praise. Only steady effort. The trees responded almost immediately. Tiny green leaves unfolded. Fresh branches stretched toward the morning light. Every day they became slightly stronger. Meanwhile, the jar sitting in the village square remained exactly where everyone had admired it. No one intended to harm it. But people naturally interacted with it. A thirsty traveler dipped his cup inside. Children splashed water onto the ground while playing. Dogs drank from it. The afternoon sun slowly evaporated what remained. Each day there was less. Until one morning. The jar was empty. Nothing dramatic had happened. No disaster. No theft. Its purpose had simply disappeared little by little. A week later Elara invited Adrian behind the old mill. The hidden saplings had grown taller. Their leaves shimmered with healthy color. Nearby sat the second jar. Dry. Light enough to lift with one hand. She looked at Adrian. Both jars began equally full. They held the same potential. The difference wasn't the water. It was where the water went. Adrian stared quietly at the empty vessel. Something inside him began connecting pieces he had never connected before. Elara knelt beside one of the young trees. When energy is directed toward growth, life quietly expands. But when that same energy is spent proving what will happen, there is less available for making it happen. She picked up the empty jar. You believed people's admiration was adding strength. In reality, it was slowly draining the very thing your dream needed most. Adrian frowned. "I don't understand." "I wasn't lying. I truly wanted to build those things. I meant every word." "I know," Elara replied gently. "Intentions were never your problem." She pointed toward the growing trees. "Tell me. When do roots grow the fastest?" Adrian thought for a moment. "When no one can see them." She smiled. "Exactly. Growth begins underground. No applause. No audience. No celebration. 4 weeks. Sometimes months. Nothing visible happens. But beneath the surface, everything important is taking shape." She looked directly into his eyes. Most people become uncomfortable during that invisible season. So they replace progress with conversation. They replace action with identity. They begin introducing themselves as the person they're going to become. And for a little while, the brain accepts that story. Adrian felt his chest tighten. Every sentence felt strangely familiar. Every unfinished dream suddenly looked different. Not because he'd lacked talent, but because he'd unknowingly traded momentum for recognition. Adrian stood without speaking. The breeze moved gently through the young trees behind the old mill, and for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his next big idea. He was thinking about every unfinished one. Not with guilt. With clarity. He remembered the excitement of describing his plans to strangers. The long conversations. The compliments. The encouragement. The warm feeling that followed every announcement. Back then, he had believed those moments were fuel. Now they looked more like fireworks. Bright. Beautiful. Gone within seconds. Leaving only darkness behind. Elara picked up a small iron hammer resting beside a workbench. Without warning, she struck an unfinished horseshoe lying on the table. The sharp ring echoed through the empty mill. Do you know why blacksmiths don't stop after the first strike? Adrian shook his head. Because the first strike changes almost nothing. She struck the metal again. Then again. Each blow seemed insignificant by itself. Yet slowly, the rough piece of iron began taking shape. If someone watched only the first few strikes, she said, they'd believe nothing was happening. She delivered another careful blow. But transformation isn't created by dramatic moments. It's created by repeated ones. She laid the hammer down. The world celebrates breakthroughs. It rarely notices repetition. Adrian thought back to his own life. He had always chased the feeling of beginning. Every fresh idea carried endless possibilities. There were no mistakes yet. No setbacks. No difficult middle. Only imagination. But imagination had become a comfortable place to live. Reality asked for something imagination never demanded. Consistency. Not inspiration. Not excitement. Not confidence. Just another day of showing up. Then another. Then another. For several weeks Adrian stayed away from the village gathering places. People assumed he was traveling. Others believed he had started another ambitious project that would disappear before winter. This time, he didn't correct them. He let people wonder. It felt strangely uncomfortable. His hands often reached for the habit of explaining himself. He wanted someone to know. Someone to admire the direction he was heading. More than once he caught himself rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I've started something important. You'll be amazed when it's finished. The words formed easily. Keeping them inside did not. That's when Adrian realized something unexpected. The habit wasn't simply talking. It was seeking reassurance. Every announcement had been asking the same hidden question. Do you believe I can become this person? For years, he had borrowed confidence from other people. Now there was no one to borrow it from. If the work continued, it would have to continue because he chose it. Not because someone else believed in it. One afternoon, Adrian entered an abandoned storage shed near the river. Dust covered the floor. Broken tools leaned against cracked wooden walls. Most people saw junk. He saw possibility. Not because it looked impressive. Because no one cared about it. There would be no visitors. No interruptions. No audience. He cleaned the room slowly. One board. One shelf. One window. The work wasn't exciting. No one applauded sweeping a floor. No one admired organizing old tools. But something unusual began happening. Each completed task made the next one slightly easier. Momentum replaced motivation. Instead of asking, "Do I feel like working today?" he found himself asking, "What's the next small piece?" The question changed everything. Big dreams had always overwhelmed him. Small actions never did. Days became routines. Morning work. Simple meals. An hour inside the shed every evening. Sometimes he accomplished very little. A hinge repaired. A plank sanded. A measurement corrected. On other days, progress came quickly. Yet he stopped measuring success by visible results. He measured it by returning. Another day. Another hour. Another honest effort. That became enough. Ironically, as he cared less about appearing productive, he became more productive than ever before. Several months later, Elara visited the shed. She didn't compliment the furniture taking shape inside. She looked instead at Adrian himself. "You've changed." He smiled. "I've built almost nothing." She laughed softly. "No. You've built the builder." The sentence lingered long after she spoke it. For years Adrian had obsessed over outcomes. A bridge. An instrument. Maps. Recognition. Success. He had never realized that every meaningful achievement begins by changing the person creating it. A masterpiece doesn't appear first. The craftsman does. Winter arrived early that year. The river froze along its edges. Smoke rose from chimneys each morning as villagers hurried through the cold. One evening, a violent storm swept across the valley. Powerful winds tore branches from trees. Several rooftops suffered damage. Among them was the community meeting hall. People gathered immediately to repair it before heavier snowfall arrived. Workers searched for sturdy wooden beams. They soon discovered the strongest timber in the village wasn't stored in the marketplace. It rested quietly inside Adrian's workshop. Few even knew he had been preparing it. When neighbors asked where the wood had come from, Adrian simply answered, "I've been working." Nothing more. No speeches. No explanation. No reminder that he had predicted this moment. His work spoke clearly enough. The beams held the roof together through the rest of winter. No one remembered whether Adrian had ever announced becoming a craftsman. They remembered something far more valuable. When the village needed strength, he had already built it. When spring finally returned, the valley looked different. Fields that had spent months buried beneath frost slowly turned green again. The river flowed faster. Children filled the roads with laughter. Birdsong replaced the silence of winter. Change had arrived so gradually that almost no one could point to the exact day it happened. Growth rarely announces itself. It simply becomes impossible to ignore. Adrian noticed something similar within himself. Months earlier, every morning had begun with the question, "How can I prove I'm making progress?" Now the question was different. "What deserves my attention today?" It seemed like a small shift. But it transformed everything. His happiness no longer depended on being seen. It depended on moving forward. One honest step. Then another. Then another. As word spread about Adrian's craftsmanship, people naturally became curious. Neighbors stopped by his workshop. Travelers asked to buy his furniture. Merchants requested custom pieces. One afternoon, a young apprentice approached him carrying a notebook. His eyes were full of excitement. "I have so many plans," the young man said. "I want to build workshops across the region. I want everyone to know what I'm working toward." Adrian smiled. The conversation felt strangely familiar. Years earlier, those same words could have been his own. Instead of answering immediately, he invited the apprentice inside. The workshop wasn't impressive because it was luxurious. It was impressive because every shelf, every table, every cabinet carried tiny imperfections. Small marks. Corrected mistakes. Evidence of learning. Nothing had appeared overnight. Everything had been earned. Adrian picked up 2 pieces of oak. One had been polished until it reflected the afternoon sunlight. The other remained rough and unfinished. He handed the polished board to the apprentice. "Which one would you rather own?" "The finished one." "Why?" "Because someone invested time into it." Adrian nodded. "Exactly." He then placed the unfinished board beside it. "This one has potential. The other has proof." He paused. The world admires potential for a moment. But it trusts proof for a lifetime. The apprentice quietly closed his notebook. For the first time that afternoon, he stopped talking about what he wanted to become, and started asking how to begin. Human beings often misunderstand confidence. We imagine confident people constantly speaking about their future, declaring bold intentions, making public promises. But genuine confidence behaves differently. It doesn't rush to be recognized. It doesn't demand attention before the work begins. It doesn't depend on applause to survive. Real confidence is surprisingly quiet. Not because it lacks belief, but because it doesn't need to convince anyone. It understands that every hour spent explaining a dream is an hour that could have been spent building it. This doesn't mean you should never share your goals. Support can be valuable. Guidance can change your life. Encouragement matters. But timing matters too. There is a difference between seeking wisdom and seeking validation. One strengthens your journey. The other can quietly replace it. Psychologists have spent decades studying the strange relationship between intention and action. Again and again, researchers have found something fascinating. When people receive social recognition for a goal before meaningful progress has been made, the mind can experience a subtle feeling of completion. The identity begins arriving before the effort. The satisfaction comes before the achievement. And once that happens, the urgency to act often weakens. Not because the dream disappeared, but because part of the emotional reward has already been collected. It's one of the quietest traps the human mind creates. It doesn't look like failure. It feels like success. Until months pass. And nothing has changed. Look closely at the strongest oak tree in a forest. Long before anyone admired its branches, its roots were spreading through darkness. No audience. No celebration. No headlines. The most important work happened where no one could see it. People remember the tree. Nature remembers the roots. Your own ambitions are no different. Every meaningful achievement begins in places that rarely receive attention. Early mornings when nobody is watching. Late nights when nobody is applauding. Ordinary afternoons filled with repetitive effort. The invisible hours eventually become visible results. Always. Perhaps you've been carrying an idea for years. A business. A degree. A healthier body. A book waiting to be written. A skill you've always wanted to master. Or maybe you've already announced it dozens of times. Each conversation bringing a brief rush of excitement. Each promise making tomorrow feel important. There's no reason to carry guilt. Awareness is enough. Because today offers something yesterday never could. A different choice. You don't need another declaration. You don't need another perfect plan. You don't need permission. You need one quiet action. Then another. And another after that. Protect your ambition while it's still fragile. Not because it should remain hidden forever, but because young dreams are like fresh foundations. They become stronger before they become visible. One day, people may admire what you've created. They may ask how you became so disciplined, so consistent, so skilled. They'll see the finished work. They won't see the thousands of ordinary moments that made it possible. And that's perfectly fine. Those moments were never meant for an audience. They were meant to shape you. So the next time you feel the urge to announce every exciting idea the moment it appears, ask yourself a different question. Would I rather collect compliments today? Or build something that earns respect years from now? Sometimes the most powerful promise you'll ever make is the one you keep entirely to yourself. Because dreams don't become real the moment they're spoken. They become real. One quiet day of honest work at a time. If this story gave you a new perspective, take a moment to reflect before sharing your next big goal. Let your progress become your introduction. And if you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more stories and psychological insights that reveal how small changes in the way we think can completely transform the way we live. Thank you for watching.